listening to She Shield, your one stop pod for all topics personal safety. I'm your host, Sophia, and my goal is to help educate women and men on concealed carry, martial arts, and all topics self defense. This episode is brought to you by Big Tex Ordnance, your soon to be favorite retailer for all of your firearms needs. BTO believes in only selling high quality gear for responsibly armed citizens, as well as providing pre and post sale support. BTO values firearms training and supports firearms instructors nationwide. They even pay for their staff to train with high level instructors to ensure that when you, as the consumer, reach out, you are taken care of. Today, we have Matt Larson on the show. I feel like that name alone speaks for itself, but Matt, I would love for you to go ahead and introduce yourself to the listeners.
Okay. I normally hate to do that, but um, my name is Matt Larson. I was a career soldier. I was a Marine. I was an Army Ranger. I uh, was the guy who got most of the credit for designing the Army's modern Army Combatives Program, although it was not actually just me. I founded or was one of the guys involved in founding the Army's Combatives Instructor School at Fort Benning. I did trained a bunch of other people since then, and now I'm the director of hand-to-hand combat training at West Point, and I teach combat psychology from an evolutionary perspective.
Thank you, Matt, for introducing yourself to the listeners. I would love to know how you originally got into combatives, how that passion started for you, if you don't mind.
Okay, so I never did any martial arts as a kid. I'm from Houston, Texas, and so I did the sports that were there. I did, baseball and football and rodeo, and and so I went to the Marines when I was really young, 17, and my first duty station was Tokyo. And so I thought, if I don't do any martial arts training while I'm here, I will have wasted an opportunity. This is back in the mid '80s, so I'm of the generation where we had like David Carradine playing kung fu on TV. That was, and Bruce Lee and all that. So that's where I started training, and I trained judo and karate in Tokyo for a couple of years, and then I went from there got assigned to the Fifth Marines, so I was stationed in Okinawa and toured around the Pacific, and got exposed to a lot of other martial arts during all that time, and so that I just kind of pursued. I was always kind of doing it as a hobby during that era. There's a lot of stories involved there, but for a decade, I was as a hobbyist. And at some point in that time, I switched over from the Marine Corps to the Army Rangers. And then, so I was actually training judo, at the time, whenever like the first Ultimate Fighting Championship came along. So I was one of the early guys training Brazilian Jiu Jitsu because we had a connection to those guys. So I was training, back in 94, 95 in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. And then because I was a soldier, I started training my guys, and slowly became, that grew. So it slowly became like training, the company, the battalion, the whole Ranger Regiment, and then the whole Army. And, and so that kind of steered where my interests lie in the martial arts, because I was, tasked with training, large organizations. And also because I couldn't like focus on like my martial arts journey. I couldn't be about me and just me trying to get better, because it always had to be about, can I train this group of people? So really what mine is about is like combining all the lessons of a military leader with the lessons of a martial arts teacher, so that you end up with, how do you get large organizations trained? And and if you imagine, like I said, I teach at West Point now, so we're not going to win the next war because our lieutenants and captains are better at hand-to-hand combat than the enemy. That's not going to be the deciding factor. So what that tells you, though, is there's something else going on. Why is it that we train hand-to-hand combat at West Point for all the cadets? It's like a requirement. You must go through our courses. You must train. And the reason is because we are going to win the next war because of the way we think, what our values are. Are our leaders capable of instilling a warrior ethos, and not just a warrior ethos, but the sort of warrior ethos that the warriors of a republic, you know, should have, or that the people of our republic can be proud that their warriors have. So that is how my focus grew over time. And it also because the demands of training soldiers for combat, there's no room for bullshit. In other words, like all around America, there are people learning to fight with katanas right now, right? It's not because they need to, because ninjas might have cost them on the way to their car at the mall, right? Like so
Right.
so most martial arts, it doesn't matter if it's real, right? They can just totally be bullshit. But with that, but in the army, you can't, lives are on the line. You know what I mean? We've been at war for decades now with my students out fighting real bad guys in real fights. And not just real fights like real hand-to-hand fights. I mean real fights where you light people on fire and they're trying to blow you into smithereens, and you end up in the room with those guys. So we have to have a pretty big bullshit filter, and we have to be focused on what really works and the way fights really happen. So that's kind of, that's on the martial arts side. That's kind of what has dictated where I've been going all these years.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for sharing that. I would love to know next how you got into evolutionary psychology in your journey.
Yeah, so I think from that it becomes obvious that a lot of what's going on in combatives training is psychology, right? Like what you're really doing. A lot
Yes.
of it is how do you inculcate the warrior ethos in people, and what does that even mean? And so I'll tell you a kind of interesting story about it. So the Army has a program called the Resiliency Program, and it's about how do you make people hardened mentally so that they don't suffer, bad effects from combat, become victims of PTSD, etc. Right. So the very first person in charge of that was a lady named Rhonda Cornum, General Rhonda Cornum, and if some of you might remember her, she was a flight surgeon who was shot down in the first Gulf War and captured by the Iraqis, and then she was a POW for a while, and then she was rescued. And so there's a whole lot to that story. So she's a really super impressive person, right? And so at the time, we were already had a pretty good combatives program going in the Army, and so we were under the impression at that time that we didn't have any of our combatives people committing suicide. That turns out not to be true, and I can explain later on what I mean by that. But we were under that impression. So, pardon me. So so I got a meeting with her, and I wanted to talk to her about incorporating combatives training into the resiliency program so that we could get these, spread this out across the Army. And so she told me, well, um, we are bound by law to only use peer-reviewed research in our program, which makes sense, but what also makes sense is there's not a whole lot of warriors who are doing psychological research, right? It's not like you're getting dudes with, 4 years of sustained combat in an infantry platoon who then go on to become clinical psychologists. And, so I thought, okay, well,
Right.
the only way this is going to happen is if we make it happen, right? We're going to have to like catalyze the science. And so that's part of the story. The other part of the story is the common wisdom out there is didn't match up with my experiences. So the most popular book about combat psychology was Dave Grossman's book on killing. So I read that when I was, quite young, but had already been in battle, and it is bullshit. Like it's nothing to do with my combat experience whatsoever, and um, and so that told me that, but like, okay, well, these guys are just wrong about this, right? And once again, you don't get a lot of people with like 4 or 5 years of intense infantry combat at the platoon level who then go on to write books about, become psychologists and then write books about what's going on in psychology and combat. And even Grossman, he's a Ranger qualified guy, but he's not a combat vet, right? And I just don't think anybody who's not been in combat could really sort of understand what's going on. So, so with that being said, that spurred me on as well. And whenever I so my undergraduate degree was in natural sciences. Pardon me, because I used to live in Africa. Right, it's a long story, but I used to live in Africa, and which is like the coolest place in the world. So I was trying to go back to Africa and work in conservation. I was actually trying to work on reintroduction of like predators, and I studied quite extensively during that program the reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone, and which is a super fascinating story. If the viewers ever want to check it out, there's some really interesting stuff. But
Yes,
that was what,
absolutely.
yeah, right. That was what my bachelor's degree was in, and so then when it came time to do graduate degrees, um, I did, you know, uh, combat psychology masters, and it's specifically focused on combat psychology. But I already had this background in biology, or so, and and all that experience with studying the wolves and etc. And so that really informed what I was learning, because a lot of the most of what is psychology. Um, so psychology is going through this big transition. So you have the legacy psychology of the 20th century, right? Which is like the legacy social sciences of the 20th century. And all that stuff is analogous to what it was like to study biology before Darwin, right? So, Darwin he said about people who were studying nature before him that they were great observers. And that's a really good way to think about it, right? So they have taken in a lot of knowledge. They've done a million studies, observed a million groups of people doing different stuff. They know a lot, right? But just like those biologists were missing that overarching narrative that explains why a leaf would be this way, or why horses would behave this way, or etc. With all that, they were missing that, so they couldn't really understand it. And the 20th century psychology is much like that. There's a whole lot of controversy, as you can imagine, with this transition, and most of the world of psychology is still in the you know, it's still the pre-narrative, pre-Darwin era of psychology, and it's contentious. It's just like, imagine how long it took for biology to accept fully that evolution was how biology works. Like it took centuries, right? It's still ongoing in some areas of our society. People are fighting about this thing. So, with that being said, the same thing is going on in psychology now, and it's probably going to go on for a long time. Okay, but with that being said, you know, all of that, when I started like really digging down into it and understanding what was going on, all of it just jived completely with my own anecdotal evidence. Like, this is what I knew and felt, and my experiences soldiering and etc. So therefore, that's probably what drove me in that direction. And there's some fascinating new things that are coming out all the time nowadays, because we're learning so much, because we have this new lens, that we're applying to the problems.
Absolutely. Well, I'm so glad we have someone like you teaching the recruits from the very beginning so that they can be educated and know the psychology behind violence so that they can prevent it. I would love to know next how this applies to the civilian world, if you don't mind.
So if you think about violence, right? So let me just kind of break down the way it really works. Humans are a coalition forming species. We form coalitions in order to compete over resources. Okay, so that's your coalition that you're part of. That's your in group, right? And the other coalitions, that's your out group. And so what you see is that there are different kinds of violence that go on within an in group or between groups. Okay, so for example, inside your group, you got hierarchical fighting, right? So hierarchical fighting is typically not deadly, because the group um, is going to do better if both people survive, right? Because then you're going to have more people on your team, right? 9-man squads are better than 8-man squads. So therefore, we typically don't have as intense of violence. Okay, so it's hierarchical. And I'll just give you an example, right? When they're fighting in the UFC, what are they fighting over? Well, they're fighting over status, right? It's just social status. That's all it is, right? So money is is a substitute for social status in our society, or it's an indicator of it, etc. But that's all they're fighting over, right? Social status. And when two uh, children are fighting on the playground, what are they fighting over? Same thing. They're just fighting over social status, right? So that's within group hierarchical fighting. Okay. So then you have other types of violence between groups. You have warfare. So when a group of wolves owns a valley and another group of wolves doesn't, the group that doesn't, maybe they don't have any place to hunt, so they're going to starve. So they're going to come in and try to take that valley, right? And their unit cohesion and their strength of their unit is going to be the deciding factors, but they're going to have to come in and fight those other wolves for it, and they're going to kill them in the meantime, right? So like, I'll give you just a very interesting aside. So when I was studying the wolves, one of the things that goes on, just to show you how sophisticated their kind of fighting is, there was a band of wolves that owned a valley in Yellowstone, and they had this hill where they all the females and their pups were whenever they were raising their pups. So and then the males would go out and hunting and whatnot. So another band of wolves that was bigger came in and surrounded the hill so that the males couldn't get back to them to bring food to the females and pups. And then the females and pups couldn't get down to water sources, right? And so the males were afraid to fight them because they were bigger. So they laid siege to them. And so they stayed there until the pups all died. Then they left. Then the next summer, they came back and just beat that pack out of the valley because they didn't have enough wolves to sustain them because they'd killed all their pups, made all their pups starve through siege warfare. There, look, that's how sophisticated it is among wolves, right? Okay, so among people, you can imagine it's warfare, right? So with that being said, that's warfare. Now the next one is, and this is the one that the other one. This is like predation. So what we have is predators, and typically it can be within group, but that's because our groups are so large that we lose cohesion in those groups, right? And we also have within our large group, imagine our large group of the United States, right? 300 million people. Okay, but within that, we have a whole bunch of other in groups and out groups that have formed that are actually at each other's throat. The only thing keeping them from being in open warfare with each other is the law and power of the government and etc. Right? Okay, so you have a lot of predation between people who don't feel affinity for their in group, right? So that's like random, like I said, muggings, home takeovers, all the things that you hear about as crime. You know what I'm saying? Okay, so that's all just to explain the types of violence. Now the next thing is to explain how humans deal with it. What is our mindset? How do we get our problems? Blah, blah, blah. Okay. So I just give you an example, right? I used to live in Zambia. In the northern part of Zambia, and in the Congo, which is just north of there, they have malaria, right? So what that means is if a woman has a baby in a certain type of year, the chances of it dying from malaria are quite high. And most women, they don't really have reliable birth control. So most women have large number of children, 6, 7, 8 kids. Okay. The odds that all of them are going to grow to adulthood are very slim. Okay. So whenever a woman in Zambia loses one of her children, just like our great grandmothers used to regularly here in the States, right? They mourn, but they have 5 other kids, so they just keep getting about their life, right? They will miss that child forever, feel bad about it, and I'm not trying to diminish that at all, but it doesn't destroy their life because it can't, because they have to survive, right? Because life is harsh, and if they don't keep going, okay, so compare that to what happens in a country like the United States when a woman loses her child. It could be devastating, destroy her whole life. Everything changes, etc. Right? So we have bigger results, not because the tragedy is worse. We have bigger results because we're less resilient, because we don't need to be. We live in luxury compared to those people down there, right? So to be able to carry on and, eat ashes or whatever we do, that's a luxury, right? It's like a lot of our mental problems, they're that way. They're the products of us living in luxury. So to just kind of understand that that's true, right? It's not even like people might not want to hear it. but it remains true. Okay, so with that being said, now think about the way violence works like that. Okay, so um, we were talking about this briefly beforehand, but I'll just kind of tell you know, imagine imagine what we call PTSD. Okay, PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder, which started out, the initial name was post Vietnam syndrome. Okay, so what happened with PTSD was they started noticing people when they were coming back from Vietnam were having all kind of these symptoms, list of symptoms that grew into what we now call PTSD. Okay, so one of the things about a psychology is that many of the different PTSD is this big bucket, and there's a whole bunch of different things that we don't necessarily haven't necessarily understood that we put into it. I'll give you an example. In the First World War, they used to call it shell shock, right? So they thought initially it was because artillery would blow people up and rattle them, and then they would have, these mental symptoms, even though they weren't injured. Okay, so then they later started realizing that some people had these symptoms who had never been shelled. So it wasn't shell shock was an inaccurate phrase. So in World War II, they called it combat fatigue. Okay. But it turns out that we found out in Iraq and Afghanistan, when we had traumatic brain injury as like one of the most common kinds of wound people suffered over there, that traumatic brain injury, which is after you get blown up, the symptoms mirror this other methods of or other ways of things that we call PTSD. So just like in World War One, right? So there was some truth to the shell shock thing. We just didn't necessarily understand it correctly, right? Okay, so what that shows you is that your body only has certain defensive mechanisms, and it employs them for various kinds of threats. So, for example, the symptoms of the flu are the same as they are for nerve agent, right? So if you get a nerve agent, how can you tell? Well, you get a runny nose, you get a headache. You know what I mean? Like, it's because those are your body's defense mechanisms, right? So when you get PTSD, what that means is there's this list of symptoms, but it doesn't mean what the cause is. The cause could be traumatic brain injury. The cause could be something else, right? And what we're finding out recently is that the biggest cause is what we call moral injuries. Okay, so a moral injury is when you have a deeply held belief that gets destroyed by experiences or events, something you did, something you witnessed, etc. Okay, so so there's a million examples, but let me just kind of give everybody a simple one. Everyone has heard their whole life that as a moral principle, that it's a terrible thing to kill a child, right? So this happened for the Rangers that were in Somalia, which I wasn't one of them, but I was in the Rangers at the same time. So what happened was the Somalis didn't have enough guns to go around. So Somali guy goes out, Rangers shoot him. He's laying there with his gun. So they wanted to send another guy out to get that gun. Well, another adult comes out, shoot him. Okay, and I got two dead adults. Next thing to do is send an 8-year-old out. Okay, so the first time you let him get the gun and go back, right? But your life is on the line. If that gun gets back in somebody's hands, you're fighting. So pretty soon, the next time that 8-year-old comes out, you shoot him because you must, or you're going to die. Okay. In the same fight, the bad guys, the Somalis, they like hid like a line of women and children in the street and then came towards the Rangers shooting from underneath their armpits and stuff. So pretty soon you mow them down, right? Or you're going to die. Okay. So war is full of things like that. The people shoot at you from mortars from a school trying to get you to shoot back at them, or they shoot at you from the window of a hospital trying to get you to shoot back at them. And if you do, look, they're the actual war criminals. If you read the rules of war, they're the one breaking the law, right? The law of war. But man, you're still the one that shot those innocent people, and so when you go to war, you have to deal with that kind of stuff. And it's not just that, it happens in civilian society too.
Okay.
Well, I'll come back on that one. But anyway, so this is moral injuries, right? I'll come back and give you some civilian examples in a minute. But Okay, so that's a moral injury, right? So the question is though, okay, war is not more horrible than it used to be. When chimpanzees fight each other, they like tear the bodies apart, eviscerate them, dance in them, and then eat portions of them. You know what I mean? Like, so that's as horrible as anything that's going on in modern war, right? So war has not like gotten worse over time. It's, when Genghis Khan was taking over cities, it was as bad as anything that's going on in warfare today, probably worse, right? Okay, so where do we get these deeply held beliefs that are destroyed by reality? Because actually, war is just a way of exposing what the world is really like. Okay, the actual world is that. Peace is not the norm in human history. War is the norm. Okay, so with that being said, understanding how we get these norms, that's evolved psychology. It's like, okay, how did it get there? How do we end up with these beliefs? And I'll just give you an example, right? Like I'm a regular person. My dad's an electrician. My mother's a nurse. I went to public school, so I, had a Boy Scout leaders and, you know, elementary school teachers, and I was raised in the Lutheran church and went to the Baptist church, and so like regular American run of the mill experiences. Okay, so no one in all that list, not no one, but almost no one in all that list of people like had a lot of combat experience to inform their morals. You see what I mean? So when I was 17 years old, or I think the first time I went to combat, I was probably 21, um, maybe 22, something like that. Anyway, the first time I was in combat, um, my morals were informed by that. And then terrible things happened. First person I ever saw get shot on the battlefield was like an unarmed guy, civilian, running around the battlefield fleeing. But everybody's scared shitless, right? And you can't like blame people for being jumpy whenever they're afraid they're going to die, and somebody comes running around the corner 20 feet in front of you. It's like, and so that kind of stuff happens. Well, now you're the guy that's got to deal with it, forever. So that spurs on a lot of thinking. Why would it be this way? Why would you think that stuff? Why would you not be prepared for that? How do we not prepare ourselves for that inevitability? Because it is inevitable, right? Okay, so anyway, so that's how does it relate to civilians? Well, it relates exactly like this. As long as you live in a protected world where nothing bad happens because other tough people are out there protecting you, okay, then you don't ever have to deal with these moral problems because other people are doing it for you. But that's just trusting, counting on a lot from those people, you know? So in my opinion, if you're going to be ready for what you're going to do in a defensive situation or etc., you need to have the warrior values. You need to have a moral structure that can handle it. You know what I mean? So like in the Army, it's pretty stark, right? Like we take young people who were raised like you and I, regular people from America, the children of America, and we have to teach them to be warriors, not just how to fight, right? We got to teach them like, marksmanship, fire maneuver, you know, weaponry, all that kind of stuff. Okay, then we got to take them to war, win the war, right? Fight all the fights that are required of it. And you don't get to pick those. Sometimes the bad guys get to pick them and how they're going to go. And then come back and get out of the Army, fit into society, raise children, hold down jobs, be productive citizens, not be suffering the rest of your life because of your experiences. Okay, so that requires us to understand the problem. You know what I mean? It requires us to understand why we believe the things we believe. And that's a hard thing because not many people want to examine why they believe what they believe. You know what I mean? Why is it that you think this is true and this is important and this moral rule is written in stone? Why do you believe that? Right? And, just to be a little controversial, look, a lot of people think it's because that their morals come from their religion. Okay, so let's examine that just on the surface level. Do Christians today have the same morals that Christians had 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago? Because if your morals were coming from your religion, the answer would be yes. Okay, so they're in part coming from your religion because it's, even if you take the metaphysics out of it, it's a social tradition. So in part, they're coming from it, but they're also in part coming from your society. Okay? So I don't want to get too far down that tangent, but I'll just tell you how you, how we become, how we gain the morals that we have, right? Okay. So imagine your values they're influenced by three vectors. Okay. So those vectors are vertical. Vertical is from your parents, your grandparents, etc. That's passed down from you. Okay. That's the stuff you're most likely to pass on to your children. It's also not necessarily the stuff that's most likely to impact your life, as far as not the stuff that you're necessarily going to follow, but that's an important vector, right? The next vector is oblique, so that's your other adults in your society. That's your coaches, teachers, mentors. Okay, that's us, right? You and I right now on this podcast talking to people, right? That's me in front of my classroom with my students. Okay. It's your Boy Scout leader. It's your elementary school teacher. It's your preacher. And the last one, and this is the most important one, is vertical. I'm sorry, horizontal. Horizontal is with your peers. So you are negotiating your moral rules with your peers all the time. Okay, so whenever you put a bunch of 6-year-olds together in the playground, in the school, they're out there negotiating what rules they will live by between themselves. That's one of the things that's going on. That's why when you're parenting, one of the most important things you can do is select the children whom your children are going to be around, because you're selecting who the peer group is, where this negotiation will go on. And as an educator or as a parent, either one, you can structure people's lives or their experiences that will sort of canalize that or channelize that negotiation. I'll give you an example. What's going on a sports team, right? I mean, imagine when you play sports, what's going on? Why do we have our children play sports? It's a great example. Well, it's not because they need ball handling skills by the time they're 30 or else they're screwed, right? It's like, okay, man, we better get Junior out there handling the ball now, or else he's never going to be able to make a living, right? Like, that's not why, right? So then why? Well, what's going on a game, sports game? I just imagine like a hockey game. Are they competing or are they cooperating? Well, they're both, right? What they're actually doing is they're competing against each other to win, but they're cooperating on the rules. And then on their team, they're cooperating to make it a most effective team they can, but they're competing for social hierarchy on that team, right? So if you think about it, that sophisticated dance of competing and cooperating, that's what humans do. That's what's going on for like the members of Ford and the members of Chevy, right? They have formed these coalitions and they are inside their group trying to form the most effective team they can while they're competing for social hierarchy. And then they're competing with the other entity, Coke versus Pepsi or whatever, but they're competing within the rules, which are the law, business ethics, etc. So when you put your children on a sports team, what they're really learning is how to get by in that sophisticated dance of competing and cooperating that is adult life. You see what I mean? And so what you're doing is you're structuring that moral um, negotiation that is going on in their peer group to have outcomes that are going to make them able to function as effective adults. Does that make sense? Okay, so now, yeah, so now let's take that and let's extrapolate that over time. Okay, so this is back to the evolutionary like concept. Imagine what the morals are in a hunter-gatherer group. So hunter-gatherers, they're like wolves and chimpanzees, right? They live in a constant state of warfare. Human beings are coalition-forming animals, so we form coalitions in order to compete over resources. And so that's, your tribe or whatever, right? Your band. Okay. So within the group, just like on that hockey team, they're negotiating for or they're competing for social hierarchy, right? But they're also trying to be as strong a team as they possibly can. Okay. And then with the other teams, they're at war. Okay, so they're fighting over resources or whatnot. Now, there may or may not be rules depending upon what level of hierarchy we're talking about. But like I said, we were saying earlier, like, we have a coalition of 330 million, I think, in America now. That is us, right? Us Americans, that's our coalition. But within that, we have a lot of other groups, and they're all fighting each other, and they're all fighting each other at various levels of intensity because they're actually part of the same group at a different level, right? So humans are quite sophisticated in our it's not just one coalition, right? You can be an American and a Yankees fan and from Kansas. Like those are all groups of people that you can have different levels of loyalty to, right? So you understand my point, right? So but so but so in a hunter-gatherer band though, you have this loyalty to your little group, social hierarchical fighting within your group where you try not to hurt each other because it weakens your group, and then warfare with the other bands, right? Okay, so imagine that means that everybody is involved in war. Everybody. There's no exceptions, right? Because to be a valuable member of the band, you must be a hunter, a gatherer, and a warrior. Have to be, or else the band is weaker. So that group doesn't have room for Gandhi because Gandhi's dead wood, right? Like this guy doesn't fight. So, away with you, out into the wilderness to starve, right? Because I think it was Sebastian Junger. He said, look, there's no freedom without adherence to a group. The group gives you security, right? And that you have to be a member of a group, and you must conform to that group's social norms to be a member. Okay, so that's true, right? So with that being said, no room for Gandhi. Now, that's the case until we invented farming or agriculture. What happens when we invent agriculture? Well, you start to have social specialization. And when you have social specialization, that means that not everybody has to be a member of the fighting caste anymore. Like some people are priests, or some people are just whatever, like something else, right? And as civilization progresses, that number grows and grows and grows, and percentage grows and grows and grows. Now back to our vectors. Okay, so pretty soon, new children, smaller and smaller percentage are getting the warrior values from their vertical, and a smaller and smaller percentage of the oblique, which is the other adults in society, are warriors. And then the children that you're negotiating with in your in groups, they have the same thing going on. So there pretty soon becomes room for Gandhi. Like pretty soon you can outsource the violence to a smaller, increasingly smaller section of society. You see what I mean? And then you can have these the values of the protected class, if you will, because they don't have to confront that stuff. And so you get to a modern society now, what percentage of people in America are deeply involved in the fighting, like between other coalitions, other nations, or with the bad guys in our society who are predators and whatnot? What percentage are involved in that on the regular? very small percentage, you know. And in fact, even within the Army, what percentage of people in the Army, look, and there's, I don't know how many it is now, but it's around 1 million people in the Army if you count the Guard and reserves and whatnot, some number like that. What percentage of those people are seeing sustained combat on the platoon level? Because that number is minuscule out of the 1 million people, right? It's a very small portion that are actually doing the fighting. So even the values of the Army at large are not necessarily those of the people who were involved in the fighting. You see what I mean? So all of this to say, right? Like what this puts on all of us, and like, as I said, include in this, like the policeman who's on the beat or the person who's involved in random violence. You know, look, random violence is normal. It shouldn't destroy you if you survive it. Your moral system should be in tune with the truth of the world so that you know it's normal. You know what I mean? So even if you're a victim, if you survive it, well, you survived. Violence is normal. It's not some anomaly. Okay. So what that requires of all of us is that we have to sort of deconstruct our morals. And what I mean by that is deconstruct the sources of them, understand why we believe what we believe. Remember what I was saying earlier, like my father's an electrician, right? Okay. So my father's father was a bombardier on a B-17 in World War II. That's like, so he had some quite extensive combat experience, was prisoner of war of the Germans, escaped, blah, blah, blah. It's a long, but big war hero. So my father's values are slightly that. He protected a lot of that from him because it was a horrible experience. So he protected his family from it largely. But you get my point, right? But his mother was just like a regular lady. She's a painter. You know what I mean? So it's a housewife and a painter. And then my on the other side, my very similar sort of story. My grandfather was in World War II, but he wasn't involved heavily in the fighting or anything. And he came back and started an electrical contracting business. And, so his morals are all that, right? Now, so that's my parents. And then like, okay, my preacher when I was a kid, I still remember all my preachers when I was a kid. How many of them had like combat experience? None. You know what I mean? So everything they're saying to me is from the lens of somebody who did not have to confront those realities of the world. Right. And so you can go down the list like that, right? You can start looking, okay, well, what did they believe? Or why do they believe that? You know, because look, I've been in a lot of combat, seen a lot of terrible, horrible like things that would, and, and I'm okay, right? You know why I'm okay? Because I have thought through it enough to know what my actual morals are, right? And as I was saying, it's not, you can't be like you know, like a lot of soldiers feel bad because they were heavy-handed on the battlefield, right? And because they're scared and pissed, and there's a whole lot of emotions going on, right? Okay, so that dealing with the fact that that's a natural, normal thing. It's not like you're not an anomaly that you did that. This is the way humans deal with these situations, right? Like that's part of it because you have to be able to come back, fit into society, raise healthy, happy children, hold down a job, be able to have friendships, you know, all those sort of things. You must think through, like at that level, understand why you believe what you believe so that you can avoid those traps, you know. And I'll give you another example, and this is specifically a civilian one, but this is the same sort of thing that happens, right? So I've spoken to a lot of cops who were involved in incidents that they had a lot of trouble with because all of their training was all about how to win the fight. Like they were focused on that, how to win the fight. And they trained for hours and hours and hours and hours. And when it came down to the fight, they won it. Okay. But that's not all of the training you need. Like you need also the training of what it's going to be like, what are you going to feel, what are you going to think? And so I give you an example. If you get on YouTube and start watching a bunch of cop fights, right? One of the very common things that happens with cops is like they'll have a traffic stop and they're approaching a car and then a person comes out of the car and starts shooting at them, right? Okay, so what does the cop do? Almost every time, what the cop doesn't do is like smoothly go to a draw stroke and like win the fight. Like that's generally not what happens, right? What generally happens is there's a moment of panic when the cop is trying to get away and he's trying to take cover and then maybe even runs off, right? And then comes back once he's got his shit together and gets into the fight, right? And wins it or loses it. But that's what typically happens in those fights. Okay, so a lot of those guys feel terrible about the fact that they panicked in that moment, right? Okay, so back to biology, right? Organisms, not just humans, but all organisms deal with threats along a threat imminence continuum. And what that means is how close the threat is or how dangerous it is going to dictate how you deal with it. Okay. Yeah. So what happens is when the fight happens is normally the cop, you know, he flees and panics and then I've spoken to several people who have had felt really terrible about that because, like I said, they have had a lot of training and their training is all about like to get to that moment. You know what I mean? It's all about winning the fight, etc. All right. So yeah. So when they reintroduced wolves into Yellowstone, okay, so the elk went from a no predators whatsoever to having predators in the vicinity. So that changed their grazing patterns because now they had to start thinking somewhat defensively, right? So here's how powerful that was. That changing of their grazing patterns changed the vegetation patterns, which changed the runoff patterns, which changed the course of the rivers. Like that is how powerful that was. It's called the Tropic Cascade. It's pretty fascinating, right? But that's
Yes.
okay. So this is the level of biology we're talking about. Okay, so just having potential predators in the environment changes behavior, even though you don't have any perception of them near you, right? But if you perceive them near you, imagine you and I are two gazelles and we're out in the grass someplace and we smell a lion. It's in the neighborhood someplace. What will we do? Well, all the activity is going to happen in our prefrontal cortex, right? We're going to be thinking, what's the smart thing to do? Maybe we like take a tactical action, like move out into the short grass so we can't be ambushed, that kind of thing, right? Okay, so contrast that to when if we get ambushed, like we're now eating and all of a sudden that lion comes out of the bush and attacks us. So in biology, that's called a circus strike, which just means a near strike, right? Okay, so what happens though within the gazelle's brain is that all the brain activity is going to go back down to the root brain. It's no longer going to be in their prefrontal cortex and they're going to act. Okay, so in humans, we call that panic, right? And it's biologically triggered, right? So that's your so that means that when that cop like panics like that, okay, that's what he's going to do, right? If you see like the toughest Cape buffalo in the world and the lion comes out of the Cape buffalo is going to do the exact same thing as that cop. He's going to panic. And then courage is going to kick in because as soon as the brain activity goes back up to the prefrontal cortex, now he's going to come back into his training, right? He's going to come back into, that's when you see him come back into the fight. Okay. So I don't want to confuse the issue of the effects of training on our nervous system right now. Just talking about the moral aspect of it, right? So if you have that, so understanding that biological process that that circus strike is going to trigger in us, very likely to trigger in us. Okay, so that could take away like a lot of those bad feelings that they may have had, like questioning themselves, their manhood, their courage, their etc. after all that training. You know what I mean? So it's just like understanding the breaking down what our beliefs are, why we believe them, etc. It's the same sort of process, right? And so that's like I said, imagine that's the person who gets assaulted, in the parking lot on the way. Did I do something wrong? Did I blah blah blah? Well, how did you know there were predators in the area? Like what I'm saying? Like we gotta like engage our brains to put ourselves into those so that we understand what's going on within ourselves. And then we're much more likely to deal with it effectively. Does that all make sense?
Attention all knife enthusiasts. Today's episode is sponsored by the one and only Cold Steel Knives. For over 3 decades, Cold Steel has been leading the way in the knife industry, dedicated to creating the world's strongest and sharpest blades. They've pioneered countless innovations that have become industry hallmarks of quality and sophistication. From their revolutionary checked Kraton handles to the iconic Tonto point blade systems, Cold Steel's progressive accomplishments have set new standards in the field. Their trademark triad locking mechanism remains unrivaled by any of their competitors, proving its unbeatable performance time and time again. Their impressive lineup goes beyond just knives. They offer swords, tomahawks, machetes, cutlery, and a wide range of tools for everyday carry. Trusted by military, law enforcement, emergency services, self-defense professionals, and martial arts practitioners, Cold Steel is renowned for quality, strength, reliability, and dependability. Where strength, safety, and performance come together for over 3 decades and counting, use code SHESHIELD at checkout, that's SHESHIELD, to save and to support the pod. It does. Absolutely. So, if you had it your way, would you make it to where all civilians were psychoeducated like your recruits?
I think that if I had it my way, we would have a culture that is informed by warrior values. And that brings up like what my actual projects are and whatnot, to actually get that done. My mission have for a long time has been to change the culture within the Army, to build the sort of warrior ethos that we need in order to, win wars, come home healthy from those wars. Okay. And that's what the combatives program is really about. I mean, imagine as when we had the first Gulf War, the 24th Infantry Division, which was at Fort Stewart, Georgia at the time, had almost 600 people go AWOL when they were alerted to go to war. So that was in, 1993, I think, or 1991, I think. And imagine what they were doing to recruit people at that time. It was all about, come in for the college money, blah, blah, blah. It was all this like, here's what the Army can do for you sort of stuff, right? So when it came time for those people to actually be called up to fight, like a lot of them didn't want to. Now that division only had 2 like active duty brigades, and then they had a roundout brigade from the Georgia National Guard. So you're really only talking like maybe 12,000 people. So if you have 600 out of 12,000 not show up, that's significant, right? And it's a cultural issue. Like that's the thing. It's a cultural issue. So you have to think about it in terms of how do you steer the culture? How do you make it that where you have such a culture that doesn't happen? Okay. So hopefully like now that we're talking about cultural change and how do you affect the values of the culture, now people can start to understand what the real project is. How is it that our culture is just driving along? There are people who are purposely changing our culture as we speak away from the things that we need to be if we're going to survive as a nation, be strong, etc. So my first mission is still change the Army to be the sort of Army a democratic republic needs. We need to have the sort of value set that where we can actually win wars and our nation can be proud of our Army and we don't bring people home all messed up. Okay. But that brings us into the veterans group, and that brings us into the rest of society. So this is what you're seeing, back to like in the combative symposium and your the belt system that we have within the combatives culture. So think about what's actually going on in that group of people that's of note in this, right? So let me just come back and tell like the story of the combatives belt system. So within the Army, what happened with combatives was as we started spreading combatives around the Army, the first thing that happened was their natural rank structure of the graduates from the various courses. So there used to be 4 levels to the combatives, levels 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those eventually got cut down to 3, but it was, the basic combatives course, which is a week long, what became known as the tactical combatives course, which is 2 weeks long. There used to be a level 3 combatives instructor course and level 4, which were each a month, but then those got cut down together to be a master combatives trainer course, which was a month long. So you're really only talking, 7 weeks of training. So, but it started to become, people started thinking of those in terms of rank, like martial arts rank. Okay. But of course they're not. It was not designed to be that in anything. And if you just think about it from the perspective of what you could actually learn from about martial arts in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and we'll come back on this in another topic area too, like it's limited, right? Like you can't learn a sport in a week. If somebody came to you and said, okay, you know, we're going to have 40-hour course Monday through Friday. By the time this is over, you're going to know how to play basketball. What kind of basketball player would you be if you'd never been exposed to the sport at all in your life, right? You would still be working on dribbling, right? You would definitely not be a good basketball player. So fighting is very similar. So what can you accomplish? Okay, so those courses are designed around a completely different idea, which I'll come back and explain later on. But it's not about like you're going to go to this course and you're going to come out of it a badass. That's not possible. Right? It's just not the way human beings learn physical skills. Okay, so that rank structure idea, the next thing that happened was they defaulted to the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu rank structure. So if you started getting people out in the force and you say, oh, this guy's a blue belt, this guy's a purple belt, this guy's a brown belt, this guy's a black belt. So that works pretty good. The Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu belt structure is not bullshit. Like there's very few people who hold those ranks who don't know what they should know to hold those ranks, right? But it's very limited. It only means you're a good ground grappler. Like that's all it means, right? You can be a black belt in jiu-jitsu, know nothing about fighting, nothing about all the other aspects of what is required of a real fighter, especially from the perspective of the Army, right? So we need people who across the board have all these skills. So so after a while, the people who started the combatives program in the Army, myself and most of the guys who were like with me at the beginning of it, and I'm a jiu-jitsu black belt. I'm a 4-3 black belt in jiu-jitsu. So as these guys we promoted them all in jiu-jitsu as we went along, and everybody was fighting in jiu-jitsu tournaments and MMA and all that kind of stuff, just because we were continuing to improve our skills. So all that group of guys, we decided what we needed to do was create a belt structure that was more than the jiu-jitsu belt structure, that encompassed all the other aspects of what it means to be a combatives person. Okay. So that's the idea behind the belt system. Now, how to implement. Well, we're a global organization. We have people all over the world. Okay. So some of them are out there training in units where there are only 3 or 4 people out there training with each other. But this is the modern era. We have the internet. We have millions of sources of good information out there. Our portion is to just sort of catalog what those good sources are and steer people towards them, right? Like that's the whole idea. You got somebody who's out in the Montana National Guard or someplace like that. He's capable of finding good jiu-jitsu instruction, good marksmanship instruction, good first aid instruction, like the good fitness instruction, like all the different stuff. So I mean, and this kind of illustrates it even more. What has happened over the course of the last 20 plus years of war is that what has emerged is an American martial art. And it's not just this group of people I'm telling you about, right? So this is the people who were the ones responsible for growing it within the United States Army, but grew organically in other forces, the Marine Corps, the Navy, the Air Force. There's people out there that all have this skill set that all the real tough guys like know, and we all know what the other guy should know, right? So think about that for a second. Somebody who's a very experienced soldier, Marine, SEAL, something like that. What skill set from that crew do you want in the person next to you when you're engaged in combat? Well, we all know. You want that guy to be fit. You want him to be strong. You want him to be a good marksman. You want to have good weaponry skills. You want him to have be able to fight. You want them to be able to know combat medicine. You want them to be able to drive. You want them there's like this is skill set that we all know what they are, right? And like I said, it emerged organically. And so that's the skill set we're trying to encourage, that American martial art everywhere, from all over, right? So how do we do that? So what we do in the belt system is we imagine it as a way to encourage people to acquire those skills. Okay, so what we do is it's run it's run like an online college class. Okay, so you sign up and you're in the gray belt course, right? So our colors are, which we lifted from the Marine Corps, by the way, are gray, green, brown, and black, right? Because they're tactical colors, right? So there's a
Right.
good color. And so those are roughly the equivalent of blue, purple, brown, black, right? Except with they mean more than that. So when you say somebody's a gray belt, so that's the first one, they'll sign up to the course. Okay, so there's different areas of expertise where they have to prove. So one of them is fighting. Okay, so what do you need to be, what level of fighter to be a gray belt? Well, you need to be able to be a blue belt level fighter, jujitsu fighter. Okay. Okay, so how do you prove that to us if you're out in Montana? Well, you enter tournaments and you beat people and you get it on film. Like, we all know that John Jones is a tough fighter, right? Even though none of us most of us have never met him or seen him fight. We all know it because we've watched him on video. It's clearly him, and that's proof. Enough proof for us to all know when you met him. You wouldn't like second guess that, right? Okay, so the same thing is true. You sign up for the course, you give us pictures of us so we can recognize you. You send us a video of yourself winning fights in tournaments, and then we watch them and say, okay, there's this. And so there's a requirement. It's like 10 victories as a blue belt, right? So you got 10 victories as a blue belt. You're a blue belt level fighter, at least. Okay. So that's the fighting component. Now, how do you do the marksmanship component? Well, the marksmanship component gets harder as you go, but you basically got to prove that you have marksmanship skills and weaponry skills, right? So there's a lot of ways to do that. We like piggyback off of existing organizations. Okay. So for example, in action shooting world, you have like the International Defensive Pistol Association, you have the, international, the USPSA, et cetera. That's the United States Practical Shooting Association. And so those organizations, they have like rank structure within them. Okay. And they have different ways of coming about it. For example, IPSC, they have like the IDPA, they have a classifier that you can shoot, right? Well, you can video yourself shooting that and show the targets, and we know it's real, right? You can shoot it at a match. We can check on the website that says you shot it and got this score. Here's your name, blah, blah, blah. So we can verify that you shot at that level. Okay. So it's a little bit different in IPSC. Theirs is like, it's more similar to the way it works in chess. When you shoot at a tournament, they record all the scores and you get a percentage of the leader's score. Right. And so then
Right.
we know what rank the leaders are. Maybe that leader's a master class shooter, right. So then we can, after a while, grade you because you've shot enough matches to be able to say, look, you reliably shoot at the 70th percentile. That puts you in this rank. Right. So that's a different way of doing it, but you get the same idea. Right. So you can verify somebody's marksmanship ability on handguns, at least remotely, using piggybacking off those systems, right? So we can do that sort of stuff and then require like medical training, etc., proof of all that. And then that's what you do in the class is you just log that stuff in, show your proof. It's just like an assignment, go out and win 10 fights, get them on video, put them on here. That's your assignment. Do it. And then when they do it, pretty soon they get promoted. Okay. And so what you're really doing in each of the classes, it's like you're building a resume of your skill set. So so that the board of black belts can look at it and say, yeah, this guy's one of us. He's legit. Right. So we call the board of black belts like the black belt guild. Right. So what you think about in a couple of ways, it is kind of a medieval guild. In other words, if we do it wisely, that's what being a PhD is, right? It's a medieval guild still, right? You have to do your master work. You got to do all the courses. You can't promote your son to PhD just because he's your son.
Right.
You see what I mean?
Yes.
And you don't have the power within the combatives world to promote people yourself as a black belt, except for up the gray and green. because a brown belt has to come from the board. You see what I'm saying? So you
Yeah.
can coach somebody, you can teach them the skills, you can encourage them to you can show them the way to get all the credentials, but then they've got to give that stuff to the credentialing board, which is the Guild of Black Belts. And then that's where you get um, your credential from, because it's actually the board, the Guild of Black Belts saying, yes, you're one of us. You've met the skills to do it. Does that make sense?
It
So that's
does.
kind of what the system is, right? So,
Right.
and that's to encourage people. Look, we decided at that time we were going to open it up to other people, not just soldiers too. Although you have to display all these skills that are like, they started out as soldier skills, but they're really just the skills of the American martial art. You know what I mean? So there's lots of cops, there's lots of people who have no affiliation with anything like that, who are all training the same way, learning the same skill sets, etc. Okay. And so that's what's going on. So, that idea is, how do we push that through the society? How do we get that where it's the norm? So I'm going to give you a sort of a historical example of what we're trying to accomplish. Okay. Imagine what chivalry really was in the era of chivalry, right? In the era of feudalism. Okay, so most of our modern ideas about what chivalry was, they're actually from like the 19th century. They're like you know, Sir Walter Raleigh and those guys, like, that's not the right answer, but the authors of that era trying to give the people what a value system would be. So it's courtesy
Okay.
towards females. It's, all that kind of stuff, right? Hold the door for somebody, etc. Okay, none of that stuff has shit to do with what chivalry was in the Middle Ages. You know what I mean? Being a knight was not about opening the door for ladies. Okay. That's not what it was about, right? It wasn't about being courteous. It wasn't about any of that crap. Okay. Chivalry, the root word is cheval, right? That's horse. Okay. Chivalry means the way of the mounted warrior, is what it really means. So what is the way of the mounted warrior? Well, think about the way their society worked. How did you become rich and famous under feudalism? Well, a rich person who was like a lord or something gave you land, right, in exchange for military service. Now, why would somebody do that other than you were the son of the person who had that position before? They would do it because you're a badass. Like, I want this clown on my side because he's a badass, right? And he
Yeah.
can bring a bunch of other badasses with him, right? So I need as many badasses as I can get. Okay, so that's how you became rich and famous. Like, you proved to everyone you were a badass. Okay, so if you look at the source materials, like for what chivalry actually was, they show the way, like the actual path of chivalry. And how was it? It was called deeds of arms, right? So deeds of arms meant ways that you could prove that you were a badass, right? So it starts with the tournament and jousting, because those are like games we play, and they're like functionally not really different than shooting in a action shooting event, or entering a jiu-jitsu contest, or fighting MMA, right? It's the same sort of idea. You're going to prove that you're a badass by doing this. Now, under chivalry, there are increasingly prestigious ways to prove it. Fight in local wars, fight in foreign wars, fight in crusades, fight at different levels, right? So fighting by yourself is one, bringing a bunch of people and being a leader is more, et cetera, right? So that's what chivalry was. It was the path that you would lead if you wanted to be rich and famous and be successful and of note in their society. Okay. And it required deeds of arms. So if you look back at the belt system, that's what it is, right? It's deeds of arms. You need to go out and do that. And if you think about it, every society has something like that. How do you become like the social elite? How do you make money? How do you become successful in any society? You can look at it like at the elementary school level or at our nationwide level, right? So what are we encouraging people to do and be in order to, be successful? Like, I saw a thing the other day. It said, like, American children, you ask them what they want to be when they grow up, and they all want to be like content creators and freaking game, uh, streamers. And You know what I mean? And like,
Yes.
what do Chinese kids want to be? Astronauts. You know
Doctors.
what I mean? They want
Oh, yes.
doctors. Like so we have unintentionally structured our society in a way that is not creating a society of value. And the things that we value as a society, the things that we actually value. When I say you have values, right? Like look, the Army's got a list of Army values, right? You know, honor, integrity, etc. Okay, so what that means is these are things they want you to place value on, right? And you can see why the Army would have this list of things, that are honesty, etc. Okay, but do people really place value on them? Because that's when we say, what are your values? What that question means is, what do you actually value? And you can spot it by their actions, right? You can give lip service all you want to freaking valuing something, but if you really value it, you'll display it. You see what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
I'll tell you a story to illustrate my point. Okay. Once upon a time,
Okay.
I had the chief of staff of the Army and all his entourage, which was like 30 people in our gym. So chief of staff of the Army, for those who don't know, is the four-star general in charge of the whole Army, right? Like he's the main guy other than the secretary of the Army. Okay. So he's the main soldier. So I asked the whole group, okay, who's the best runner in the group? And they all knew. They were like, oh, yeah, this guy here, man, just won the Marine Corps Marathon, like, and I'm like, oh, that's great. That's awesome. And I said, who's the best shot? And now there were crickets. Nobody had any idea.
Interesting.
Okay, so, yeah. So, okay, who's the best fighter? Once again, no one had any idea. I'm like, so what you're telling me is that this organization, because we're talking about values, right? This organization values running ability, but does not value shooting and fighting ability, which is cool if we're going to run from the enemy. But if we're going to fight the enemy and every step we take running towards them, we could make shooting and fighting more important, right? So,
Right.
so the question is why, right? Why do they value running over shooting and fighting? Okay, they don't do it because there was a committee meeting and somebody said this is what we're going to value. What they do it is because they get out every morning and go for a unit run. And when a unit forms up and they go right face forward march and take off on a run, like a mile into that run, somebody's going to start falling back, and everybody's going to think that person's a turd, right? Everybody, and nobody wants to be that person. And there's social pressure is what makes people value running because we know who's good, we know who's bad because we do it collectively, right? Okay, so why not marksmanship? Well, because most of the time when you go to the range, nobody posts the scores or they don't make it competitive or something like that, right? But if you go make it competitive and come back and post the scores, what'll happen? Everybody will come back to the unit, they'll look at the list and they'll go to the bottom and they'll go, Larson, you suck. Right? Like, you know what I mean? And then the whole social
Right.
pressure dynamic will start. And then pretty soon, next time you go to the range, everybody evaluate it. And everybody asks who's the best marksman? And they're like, you know, she is Sofia. She's the best marksman, right? So that's what I mean, right? So yeah, so I'm saying, so
Yeah.
like if you take that and now you start thinking about, okay, what are the tools? Because fighting's obvious. How do you get them fighting? Well, you put them to fight, right? If you got a platoon of 30 people and they're all fighting, they're not just getting better at fighting, they're also judging each other. It's like if I roll with you and you ball me up, and then I roll with your husband, he balls me up, and then I roll with your next door neighbor, she balls me up. Everybody's gonna be like forming an opinion of me, right? They're gonna be like, this guy's a chump. He's not the guy you want with you when you go through the door because he can't fight, right? That's what's gonna happen. Or conversely, I could ball you up, I could ball him up, I could ball her up, and then I'll be like, that guy's a hammer. Definitely the dude you want with you, right? Okay, so
Right.
that social pressure, back to our vectors, right? That social
Right.
pressure is that's the competition that we're talking about to tell us what we value, how we get our values. See what I mean? And leaders
Yes.
can look at the society or whatever group you're at, and they can structure those competitions. They can structure that negotiation that's going on between the members of the group. See what I'm saying? So that's what,
I
like, we make
do.
the belt system, and pretty soon we're like, okay, man. Like, there's a lot of jujitsu black belts who don't compete, haven't competed since they were blue belts, right? We don't have any of those people because how do we know they fight at that level? We don't. Like, why do we know they're a black belt? What does that even mean? It means that somebody says they should wear it. Who's that somebody? So we don't have any of those people.
Yes.
There's no paper tigers in combatives because you must fight. You want to be a black belt in combatives? Well, what other black belts have you beaten? Let's see the video. You must be a real one, right? You got to prove it. Like we're about deeds. You see what I'm saying? So,
Yes,
and
yes.
that's all because it's an attempt to consciously structure the values of this group of people and then all the people that they touch. And if you're my student, you're going to get from me, I'm not from Missouri, man, but you're going to have to show me.
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm
That's
not,
good.
I'm not taking your word for it that you're a badass, right? Because there's many people want to posture. Well, okay, posture over there. You want to come over here, it's going to be fighting. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? And so,
Yes.
yeah, and so that's now imagine how that affects when we get out into the force, right? Or imagine how it affects us when we're talking about like training for self-defense. How do you know the difference between real training for self-defense and baloney? Remember, I was talking about the guys with the katanas the other day, right? So there's a
Yes.
whole lot of people in the self-defense world who are basically LARPing. There are
Yes.
commercial gyms all over the country that are teaching bullshit that's going to get you killed. How do you know? You
Absolutely.
got to you got to pressure test that stuff. You got to put it to the test. You got to not just be making the fighting real. You got to be making the fighting as real as you can figure out how to make it. You know what I mean? Like you've
Yeah.
have you gone to like Craig Douglas's classes? You see what I mean?
Yes.
Like you're out there and you're
Oh, yeah.
scrapping airsoft guns and you're hitting each other and you know what I mean? We're pressure testing for
Yes.
real. This is like grappling with strikes and weapons and buddies and all the stuff that
Yes.
happens in real fights. Yeah, it's got to be that, right? So that's why you know, as the Black Belt Guild started like realizing we wanted to be not just with dealing with the army, but dealing with the society as a whole, we knew a lot of these guys who were doing the right stuff on the civilian side, guys like Cecil
Absolutely.
and blah, 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 and so we saw what they were up to and knew they were real. And we had a lot of the world's pretty small, so we have a lot of training interactions with people that we all know each other, and so that's how this group that you see is formed and expanded. It's expanded because we're like, oh yeah, here's this guy who's just to make something up, here's this guy who's a cop in Minneapolis who's a black belt jiu-jitsu, who's got 3 MMA fights, he's a masterclass shooter in IPSC, and he's been on the job for 20 years. Okay, that's the guy, that we're trying to tell everybody to be, so why would we like reach out to that guy and say, dude, you're one of us, right? Like you're exactly the right guy. We're forming a group of people, like-minded people. And so that's what you're seeing. And it just so happens too that, like what's the main thing? Like you're talking about earlier about the 5 meter fight or the 5 foot fight, right? The entangled fighting, etc. Yeah,
Right.
why is that? Why is that the topic? Well, that's the topic because that's the hole in the training that all these people who are training realistically have found, like mostly on their own, realizing this is what goes on. You are involved in a fight on the battlefield in Iraq in a building, and there's two of you on one and everybody's armed and that guy's got a knife on him or a pistol or something like that or an AK. Okay, so you learned that lesson really quick that it's not like MMA, right? It's similar, but it's like MMA with buddies and knives and guns. Okay, so
Right.
and
Yes.
then you learn the same lesson that if you're involved in trying to arrest somebody, like I said in Kansas City, like it's the same thing is happening in those fights and the same lessons are permeating. And so pretty soon the people who are not just hobbyists who are just enjoying their time, the people who are concerned with winning real fights, who are out on the pointy end of the people who are actually involved in that, in the realness, they start thinking the same way. So that's where we ended up. And
Absolutely.
that's what you see today.
Absolutely. And part of the purpose of this podcast is to bring more light to those topics when I started my page, I got swept away with all the holster brands and companies that wanted to work with me. And then I started asking myself some real questions, and I quickly learned how much I didn't know. And ever since, I've been trying to search for that balance. And I get the question a lot. I'm a newbie at USPSA shooting. I've only shot 6
Awesome.
competitions so far. I love it. I wanted to improve my gun handling and
Hmm.
marksmanship, and also like moving with a gun. That idea was totally foreign to me. And
Yeah.
someone just mentioned to me, like, hey, if you want to get better at that, the best way to do that is to compete. Like, it will,
Facts.
encourage you. And yes, and I was lucky to have started with a instructor at the same time, so I didn't go in and form any bad habits and then have to break those. So I was lucky to have
Yeah.
someone mentor me. But now that I've really poured myself into USPSA, I kind of took a step back not too long ago when I was moving across the state, and I realized, like, I haven't trained my combative stuff in a long time. Like, the stuff from ECQC is on the shelf. Dust is starting to settle, and
Yeah.
that's when I started reaching back out to my community and learned about the Combative Summit. And I'm starting to kind of rekindle that flame and balance the teeter totter. So
Yeah.
I'm glad you were talking
Well,
about that.
it's true, and it's a real. So it's an interesting thing, and we should mention. Like I'm the biggest fan of competition. I started shooting USPSA. Well, it's a little bit of a story, but when we came back from the invasion of Panama, um, we realized we had a lot to learn about close quarters battle because we were basically. I'm talking about the Rangers at the time. We were basically like an
Okay.
infantry battalion, like a um, and so we started focusing on special operations more, urban warfare more, and et cetera. Well, I was one of the guys lucky enough as we did this that they sent me around to go to some schools and whatnot to go get some of this knowledge. And so that's the time frame when I got turned on to action shooting. Now I grew up in a marksmanship family. My grandfather was the North American bench rest shooting champion back in the 70s. And so
Well,
his son, my uncle Bill, was the world sporting clays champion whenever sporting clays was a pretty new sport. I believe that's accurate. Something similar to that. So I grew up in like marksmanship family, right? Like my whole life. And then I was a sniper in the Marines, and I was a sniper in the Ranger Battalion, etc. But when I got turned on to the action shooting, like all of a sudden, I was like, "Whoa, this is a new thing, right?" And so,
yeah.
we jumped into it big time. But we used to have this club where every Sunday we would get together at Hunt Army Airfield, which is where the First Ranger Battalion is stationed, which is in Savannah, Georgia. And we would get together at the range and have a match, right? And we called it the Sunday Night Slaughter. So we'd all go to church in the morning and then in the afternoon go practice killing people, right? And the thing was, it was all combat vets, right? Everybody was a ranger, and was everybody was focused on real training. Okay, but
Right.
the thing about competition is that it will steer you away from battlefield reality because pretty soon you're doing things that are not necessarily conducive to winning real fights. You're doing things that are conducive to winning competitions. Okay,
Mm.
so eventually we went to shoot at a civilian USPSA um, match, and we saw it going down, like people doing stuff that you would never want to do in battle, right? And so that's a very important lesson, right? So if you think about the rules for all the combat sports, why do they change the rules in civilian sports? So we talked earlier about the purpose of sports, right? So we'll just bifurcate sports. There are two kinds of levels of sport. One level is developmental. That's what we have our children play. That's what we play sometimes ourselves, right? Developmental sports, and that's for our. It's billed as entertainment for us, but really it's about the other aspects, right? But then there's professional sports, and professional sports is the entertainment business. In other words, what professional sports is about is getting you to watch so they can sell you soap, right? So professional athletes are like jugglers, right? You go to the show, you watch the juggler, and then the soap salesman comes on. That's the whole point, was to get you to buy the damn soap, right? Okay, so
Right.
So that's an important thing to note because it tells you why they changed the rules, right? When you change the rules for children in developmental sports, you're changing those rules to make it safer and you want the children to learn those psychological lessons I was talking about. When you change the rules in professional sports, it's to make it more entertaining. Like it's got nothing to do with making it more effective, right? And people in sports don't even have any idea why they're doing what they're doing, right? Like, why is the sport tailored the way it is? Like, most people don't have a clue, and it doesn't matter at all. They're just like unconsciously doing something they've enjoyed since they were four, you know, and that something was passed down father to son. But what's the why the details? You know, why the rules this way, etc. Okay, so you can see that in the combat sports big time. Now, look, we know that like wrestling, fencing, boxing, judo, sambo, those things all started out as ways to train to win fights. All of them, right? Okay, so what's the defense to the jab in judo now? Well, there isn't one because judo players are not practicing to win fights. They're practicing to win judo matches, right? What's the defense to the double leg takedown in boxing? But there isn't one. Boxers are not training to win fights. They're training to win boxing matches, right? What's the defense to the rear naked choke in wrestling? There isn't one because they're trying to win wrestling matches, right? Okay, so they're not training to win fights. Okay, so that separates combative competitions that we have specifically within the Army because the rules are there in order to steer people to do the right thing. Okay, so whenever you compete in civilian tournaments, be it a jiu-jitsu match, a judo match, or a USPSA match or whatever, you have to know it as a student that winning is going to trying to win might take you away from combative reality. So you have to balance that in yourself. You're going to get a lot of training, intense, better than you can get any other way because this person's giving you their very best game and you don't know them, right? And so that's the same thing if it's a shooting match or if it's a wrestling tournament, right? You're going to get this fabulous training, but there's going to be a tendency to steer you away from combative reality in order to win. That you, as a student, if you're focused on victory on the battlefield or, you know, self-defense, you have to understand that going in, that the things that this thing has encouraged you to do might not be the things you want to do in a fight. You know, jiu-jitsu tournament's a great example. At the black belt level, the people who pull guard, they win like substantially more than the people who don't. Okay, is that a thing you really want to do in fights? Hell no. Like
No.
it's a
Right.
stupid thing and it's a stupid rule, but it's a stupid rule that the jiu-jitsu people favor because it lets them display their art. It's not about
Right.
winning fights anymore. You know what I mean? So,
Yes.
and that's not different. Look, it's not different in MMA, right? Why do they wear 4 ounce gloves in MMA? Because it keeps you from breaking your hand. If you go back and look at the early first UFC, I think 3 of the 4 semifinalists had broken hands. The fourth one was Hoist, who didn't throw any punches. But you hit somebody in the head with a fist, you're liable to break your hand. So it's stupid in fights, right? So they wear the gloves though
Right.
because that makes the fights a lot more exciting. So that's an unreality taken on, and so the training that all MMA guys are doing is unrealistic in this way because of this goal, which is to make the fights more entertaining. It's not about making you a better fighter, you know? So that's what I'm saying about
Right.
like, look, it's just like the moral snake. Step a little deeper.
Right.
Go back and look at what you're actually doing and why is it this way? What are the results? I hope that makes sense to you, but that's a
It does.
yeah.
It does. So for someone wanting to find that balance between maybe competition shooting and then various types of martial arts, some that give you a grounded proficiency or proficiency in the grounded fight, and then another one that gives you the striking proficiency. What would you tell them so they can balance that?
Well, first off, your opportunities for training are limited geographically because where you live,
Right.
wherever it happens to be, right? So what I would say is find some place to train that you like training, and that's close to your house and it's reasonably inexpensive. You know, like where the culture jives with what you like. So if you like a shooting range where everybody's nice people and, there's a barbecue after the matches and blah, blah, blah. That's a good place to go train, right? Because you're going to get good training out of it. Same thing with a jujitsu gym or an MMA gym or a judo place or a boxing place or whatever is available locally. Do it, whatever it happens to be. But know that everybody else involved in that is stuck in that paradigm. They are unconsciously copying what was taught to them, and they're not critically thinking about what they're doing. Because for example, you go to a bunch of jiu-jitsu, you train jiu-jitsu your whole life at some local gym where they're, look, my black belt's from Jacare Cavalcante, right? He's the leader of the Alliance of Jiu-Jitsu, and the Alliance wins all the world championships. Like they're like the Chicago Bulls of jiu-jitsu. They the best sport jiu-jitsu team, like bar none, far and away, right? Okay, so I grew up in that environment. So I know that sport of jiu-jitsu quite well. That's not really what I do, right? Because I'm focused on winning real fights on a battlefield. But that's because while I was training in that gym, I always just had that in my mind because I was still rangering. I was like, okay, well, you know, if I do that, I'm gonna get killed. So I don't believe I'll do that. I'm gonna do this.
Right.
I'm gonna do
Of
this over
course.
here, and that's the same way, right? Like, so when you're go shoot those tournaments, whatever style it happens to be, and know that the place where you're doing it, those people are motivated by that. You have to take other steps. It's just exactly what you were just saying, right? So yeah, you're pursuing this marksmanship. Please continue, right? Please also find a grappling gym, or something like
Yes.
that. Also, go to Craig's classes again when you get a chance because they're great
Yes.
and they will put you back on track. It puts everything in context, right? That's what happens with these
It does.
when you train with all the guys who are presenters at the get together here, the symposium or whatever we're calling it. Every one of those guys, what they're going to do is re-blue you on combat focus. Every one of them, because that's what they are. They're all people who grew up in those other environments, but they were focused because they were on the job or something like that. It's
Yes.
just like us Rangers at the Sunday Night Slaughter. We were focused on battle because we'd already been there and we knew we were going back, and so we couldn't afford to focus on the game. Although we all understood how valuable the game was because we saw our skills blow it up, getting way better. And that's exactly what
Right.
happened. When the best units in the world hire somebody, teach them to be better shooters, better grapplers, better what? Who do they hire? The champions, right? Now you hire somebody who's like who's grandmaster class shooter and was, 3-time world champion, or, he's like Rob Latham or Jerry Bernhardt or one of those guys. When you hire those guys, you know what you're getting. This person knows more about shooting than you're ever going to freaking know on all these levels focused on this. But it doesn't know shit about how to clear a room or treat a casualty or make sure that you're getting effective use of cover or shoot through the windshield or all these things that come up in real fighting that you
Right.
must know. You must put it in those contexts if you're gonna be a real fighter. That does not to diminish them at all. We hire
Right.
those guys because they're the best in the world, right?
Yes.
But their expertise is focused. That's how they became the best. They focused their expertise down into that one little niche, and then they got really damn good at it. You know?
Right. Yes. That makes a lot of sense, and that's very encouraging. It's unfortunate to see the discouragement out there almost against competition shooting because it doesn't have any people claim it doesn't have any real world applicability, but I think it does. Application, excuse me. Um, I think it
I,
does,
I'll tell.
and
I can tell you firsthand that all the best units in the world, they all encourage everybody to shoot.
I
Yeah,
love that.
because it's totally true, right? Because here's a great example, right? If you ever shot IDPA, so
I have
IDPA is
not.
it's very similar to IPSC and USPSA. It's very similar to that, right? But they have slightly different have different rules, and one of those
Okay.
things is they score the matches slightly differently, right? It's very similar, but it's slightly different. So they use a scoring method that's called Vickers count. Okay. So the guy it's named after, Larry Vickers, was one of the founders of the IDPA. He was one of my first coaches back in the early 90s. He also
Oh,
was the primary marksmanship coach at uh, a classified unit that everybody actually knows about. But if you look up Larry, you'll see what I mean. Okay,
okay.
so like that guy is the greatest example. You know, he's a guy whose name is famous now in action shooting, but that's where they get their that from. So, yeah, don't the people who are discouraging competitions, there's a grain of truth in what they're saying, right?
Right, of
But
course.
those are the same people that are showing baloney techniques because they're not pressure testing that shit and blah blah blah. Like I don't want to name any
Right.
like martial arts that are really full of that, but there's a lot of them out there who are, we
Yes.
came from such and such army and we have this blah 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 lineage and okay,
Yeah.
that's all true, but like if you're training a room full of freaking children and housewives and whatnot, and then ain't nobody getting a black eye ever. maybe
Yeah. Yes.
maybe there's
Absolutely.
more to it than you're letting on, and maybe you're just trying to make money, right? Like it's
Right.
you know one of the lessons is one of the lessons is that martial arts evolve. Okay, so they evolve based upon whatever um, pressures they are under in the exact same way that organisms evolve. So just imagine this, right? Organisms evolve because there's pressure to survive and procreate, right? Okay, so martial arts evolve because there's pressure to be able to survive and procreate. And what I mean by that is if a martial arts teacher can know everything in the world, but if he doesn't produce any students who produce students, then it doesn't matter, right? His just a dead end in the biological terms, right? So that shit just goes away. Same thing with an organism that doesn't procreate, right? Same exact thing. It's just like a genetic dead end. That shit didn't survive, wasn't good enough, out of the gene pool, right? Okay, so what martial arts thrive? Well, they thrive based upon the environment they're in. So what's the number one most popular martial art in America? Probably still Taekwondo. Is it because
Okay, I was
Taekwondo
gonna
is
say that.
is Taekwondo the most popular because it's the best in fighting? Or is it the most popular because it's commercial niche, because it's a commercial product, right? It's commercial
Yes.
niche works. Yeah, because if you're trying to make money
Absolutely.
in the martial arts world, you're going to either target, children is a big market. Taekwondo
Yes.
targets them. And it doesn't necessarily matter if your 7 and 8 year olds training the martial arts are actually learning how to be good fighters. That's not why it's just like the sports thing, right? People are sending their kids to Taekwondo class to become more disciplined, more focused, blah, blah, blah. All this list of great
Yes.
things that have nothing to do with fighting. Right. So the same thing is true, right? So the martial arts, what pressures are they under? I'll give you another example, right? So the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu world, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is an outgrowth of judo. Okay. The difference was that it remained focused on challenge matches. So basically that was the Gracie challenge, like we'll bet this much money that we can beat you. People from other martial arts came, exhibition match, prove that this is the best art. Okay, so in that environment, that's two people, the gentleman's agreement that nobody's going to bite anybody's nose off, nobody's buddies are jumping in, there's no weapons. So in other words, a tactical vacuum, right? Those two people are going to fight it out till there's a winner. Turns out the best way to win that is ground grappling. Get them to the ground, they can't get back up, you just outmaneuver them until eventually you submit them or choke them or something, right? Okay, so
Right.
that was the way what it evolved to be. Whenever Horian Gracie got the UFC started and put Hoist in to fight, they were carrying on that tradition. That was just an extension of the challenge match thing. Well, what's happened since then? Well, it's become commercial and the tournament circuit has grown. So now jiu-jitsu is focused on the game of jiu-jitsu. So it's changed directions completely. Okay, so the art is changing. It's changed drastically. I've been training jiu-jitsu since like 94, 95, and it is really different than it was 15, 20 years ago, you know. And I'm not saying different is necessarily worse or better. It's different because it's geared towards a different niche. The things that are coming out now, they're the things that work best within this niche, not the old niche. You see
Right.
what I mean? That's exactly as if an
Yes.
organism's environment changed. It was been warm here forever, and all of a sudden it starts snowing. So all the things that couldn't handle the cold are going to die off, right? And everything that
Right.
could handle it's going to thrive. Okay, same thing going on, right? So martial arts evolved like that. So what are the evolutionary pressures on the martial arts whatever ones you're looking at? So in combatives world, one of the jobs of one of my jobs is to like steer that evolution so that it remains focused on winning fights. Because
Yeah.
my goal is actually cultural, right? To imbue the warrior values that we talked about in all the psychology talk we were talking earlier. Okay, that's my actual goal, but the tool is training because that's how you steer the values is by the events that you put people in and you steer that negotiation that we were talking about among peers for their morals. Okay, so then
Right.
that whole piece, right? That's got to be dictated by what's the focus of these tournaments when we're fighting. Back to that, what are the deeds of arms in the belt system, right? What are the things we value? Well, why is there a strength component? Well, we want people to value strength. You're going to be a black belt in combatives. You should be strong. You know what I mean? Like you should
Yes,
be as strong as
absolutely.
you can be for your frame, right? Like you should be in the weight room because that's going to make you a more capable human being. So you should be doing that, right? And the same thing. We want to be able to shoot. We want to be able to have first aid skills. What we're really saying is this is the things that you should value. And if we get them at that level of value, we can change who they are as a person, what sort of person. One of the things I haven't mentioned, the resiliency program in the Army today is based upon positive psychology. Positive psychology is like psychology used to all be focused on helping people who were messed up, right? Have a psychological problem, we're going to help you. Okay, so then some clinical psychologists said, yeah, but can we help people who don't have problems? Can we improve the lives of people who don't have problems with these same tools? And so they started looking at those tools about how to improve that. So one of the things they did was they recognized what it means to be happy and what types of happiness there are and what are the paths towards happiness, right? So there are uh, at least three mechanisms or types of genuine happiness. Okay, and understanding them is an important thing if you're going to try to be a happy person. Okay, one of them is savoring the moment. Okay, that means like just the old advice of stop and smell the roses, right? It's like, isn't this a beautiful
Right.
day? I'm here with the person I love. This is a wonderful glass of wine. Look at this sunset, you know? Okay, so that's a skill that you can do. You can say, okay, yeah, I'm going to when possible. Because, like, look, this is a great example, right? Savoring right now. I'm enjoying our conversation, right? We are getting to know each
Right.
other. This is a nice moment in my life, right? I'm going to savor this, okay? Okay, so that's savoring. The next one is flow state. Okay, flow state is whenever you revert back to the animal level. And here's what I mean by that. What separates humans from animals is that we know there's a future. Okay, so because we know there's a future, we can prepare for the future, right? We don't eat all the corn. We're going to save some so we can grow corn next year, right? Okay. Problem with that is it operates through anxiety. Okay, so we know there's a future. We're freaking nervous about it, and that's why we go to college so we can have a better, future. That's why we, save money. That's why we, you know, and it operates through anxiety, right? So flow state is when you are doing something that takes all of that away because it's so immediate and all encompassing. So, for example, when you're ground grappling and somebody's trying to break your arm, right, or when you're skydiving you're not thinking about your bills. You're not like, I wonder if I'm
Right.
going to be able to pay the electric bill this month. That's not what you're thinking about at all
Right.
because this is so, it's an immersive experience. It takes everything you got mentally, right? Okay,
Right.
so that freedom from all the anxiety, right? It can be positive or negative. Like grappling is a good experience, or like you're painting and you're so into it that you're like not thinking of anything else. It's a similar experience, right? It's also why people drink too much. It's why they do drugs, etc. Because there's negative ways to get that flow state too. That means you can relieve yourself from those anxieties. That's the drugs people abuse, because they put you in that state of mind where you're not thinking about worried about anything, right? Okay, so positive or negative flow state, but so we should stay away from the negative ones and steer towards the positive ones because they give us happiness, right? Okay, this
Right.
was what I was telling you earlier. Whenever I thought we didn't have any soldiers who were committing suicide because of the grappling program. We've learned later that that wasn't true. Okay, but it does help. Okay, but the problem with both of these two methods, savoring and flow state, is that they're both ephemeral. I mean, whenever you get off the skydive or off the mat, you're going to be high for a while because of all the endorphins flowing. But pretty soon, man, you're back to thinking about your bills. You know,
Right.
the same thing is true when this conversation is over and we have this wonderful moment stop. We're both going to be back in our lives, and we're going to have to be thinking about day to day stuff, and anxiety is going to be back, and blah 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 blah. Okay, so
Yes.
those are important things to understand about it, right? Both of those ways, right? Yeah, you get trashed. When you're through getting trashed, the bills are still there, right? You know what I mean? So
Yes.
so those are not so those are not the answer to happiness, right? So they are short term answers. Okay, so the long term answer is meaning, having a meaningful life. I think it was Nietzsche who said, if you have a big enough why, you can stand anyhow. And that means if I'm focused on doing something that matters, then I can put up with a lot, right? Okay, so
Yes.
when you're soldiering, when you're in the army or the navy or whatever, you that gives it to you because that's a meaningful existence, and people know that. And when you're soldiering, even though it sucks in a lot of ways, there's that thing going on, right? Okay, so when people leave the service, whether it be after their first enlistment or after 25 years, they often lose that sense of meaning. Go out into the regular world, find some humdrum job they hate. Now what? You know? Well, one thing we can do is give them back that sense of meaning. So, well, I have a phrase I like to use. I like to call the warrior in the room. And what I mean by that is when you're the warrior in the room, everyone around you is safer because you're there. You know what I mean? If I'm sitting at
Yeah.
Luby's eating and something bad happens, whatever it is, everybody in that room is better off because I'm sitting there, right? Because not only am I a capable fighter, I know how to, I know trauma medicine, blah, 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 you know? So we think about it in terms of, like, this is why I don't like the sheepdog analogy, right? That gets bounced around a lot. I don't like it because, and this is back to Dave Grossman, that first book that turned me on to psychology. That analogy comes from him, right? So his analogy is most people are sheep. There are wolves out there who prey on them. So there are also sheepdogs who protect the sheep, right? The problem with that is, the problem with that is, why do the sheepdogs protect the sheep? It's not because they love sheep, right?
Right.
Sheepdogs do it for the shepherd. If there was no shepherd to come along and train the sheepdogs, they would be wolves. You see what I mean? So it works as a Christian
Yes.
analogy a little bit, but the problem is that it sets them aside from society. Like all those regular people, they're just sheep. We are the noble sheepdogs who are protecting all. Okay, so I don't like that shit at all. What I like better is a bull in the herd, right? Imagine when the lions attack the herd of buffalo, who fights off the lions? The bulls. 'Cause they're tough. And the tough cows too. It's not just the bulls, right? The tough cows fight them off too, right? Because they're tough. And so it's hard for a lion. They gotta like really be tricky to get a buffalo because, man, they're not a soft target, right? Okay, so I like
Right.
that analogy a whole lot better, right? Because you know what's going to happen if there's something that goes on. There's a whole lot of bulls. You know, there's me and you both. You're out there practicing your shooting. Guess what, man? Woe unto the bad guys who are around. You see what I mean? So,
Yes.
and we're regular people, right? We're just regular people, man, fitting into society. I'm taking my children to freaking elementary school, metaphorically. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yes.
everybody else, right? So now you've got somebody who is just a regular person. They can take on that role as the bull of the herd, be the warrior in the room, be the person who makes everybody's life safe around them. And that's a sense of mission. That's something that improves our society, right? And then that can extrapolate beyond that to improving our society in every other way you can. Start taking it on as a mission. That's what being a good person is not a passive thing. Being a good person is doing good, right? You're going to train yourself to be that bull of the herd. You're going to train yourself to do that. You're going to be thinking about other people and making their lives safer all the time. And it's a short step to making it better, improving it.
Absolutely.
You see what I mean?
Yes.
So that's that's the real deal. How do we get where we need to be? Is we change people's values, in that sort of way, you know. And let me put this
Yes.
in context too, because this is an important thing to understand. Humans, as we said, they form coalitions. Okay, and you know how you can tell who is in your coalition? That's the people that you think of as us. When you say we, who do you mean? And when you say them, look, every war, every conflict, it's always us versus them, right? And
Right.
who are we? Well, we are naturally the good guys. And who are they? They're the bad guys, right? Okay, and it
Right.
doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who these us's and theys are, right? Because we are sophisticated. We don't have to it's not just familial like it is in wolves, right? It's also, we can select who we want in our group and who we don't want. And I'll tell you another angle too. We're talking about our moral groups, right? Okay,
Right.
look, morality is an evolved trait of human beings. And why did it evolve? Why would it exist? Why would we have the concepts of good and evil, you know, blah, blah, blah? Okay. So it evolved because it helps you form stronger in groups, stronger coalitions. Okay. So I can tell you the story
Right.
about that. So imagine human beings have a disgust mechanism, right? So your disgust mechanism is it started out as a way to keep you from ingesting poisons. Okay. So you're about to eat something that's like rotten. You're going to gag before you do, right? Okay.
Right.
So that mechanism is the same one, though, that we have to foreign foods. So, for example, I've never had haggis, right? But it sounds terrible to me. And there's a pretty good chance that I would be disgusted by it whenever I saw it. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So, foreign foods, that's foods that other people who have been enculturated to think are normal, we might be disgusted by, right? But the same part of your brain lights up for those two things. Okay. So, you know what is the most interesting thing? You know what that same part of your brain also lights up to? Moral disgust. So when you see something that's morally disgusting, the exact same portion of your brain that signals you that that food is wretched and you don't want to eat it, that's also lighting up. So I'll give you a story about that. So once upon a time, I had
Okay.
a meeting. I had a meeting with a Afghan warlord. I was trying to arrange to basically bribe this guy so we could move stuff between his valley without it getting robbed, right? And he was this giant guy, and
Wow.
he was painting. I mean, he was petting this little 7-year-old boy, like with his toy, the whole time we were in the meeting, right? And so naturally, I knew what was going on, right? So I was disgusted by it, right? Of course, because I'm
Right. Of course.
okay. So here's the thing, because to us, my in group, that shit's disgusting, morally
Right.
disgusting. To his in group, it wasn't. They thought it was quite normal. He was probably that 6-year-old or 8-year-old boy at that point in his life earlier. See what I'm saying? Because that was a normal, natural part
Yes.
of their society. Okay, so that's an example. That's what shows you about morality, which is actually morality is what is that mechanism to form in groups and out groups. Okay, so who are we? We are the people who believe this, think these things are good and right. They are the people with different beliefs. So you see that playing out like on the national scale in our country all the time, right? Like, what is you could pick any topic, right? But just to pick a really hot button one that ever get everybody riled up, imagine the abortion debate. Do both sides believe that
Yes.
they are morally correct? Yes, they
Yeah.
do. They both
Right.
believe they are morally correct. We believe this, they believe that. Okay. So
Yes.
once you can understand that that's what morality is, okay, so morality is that. It's got a couple of mechanisms, right? Its mechanisms are shame. What does shame mean? Shame means you are not behaving like one of us, right? So you're an
Right.
outlier in this group. You're on the verge of getting kicked out, right? That's the first one. And the other one is signaling. Signaling is, look at me. I am a paragon of what it means to be one of us. And that's what you see on the internet when everybody's like, what they're all doing all the time. That's what you see whenever a company says, this is our stance on whatever topic this is. This is what you see whenever
Right.
there's some celebrity who's like saying, I feel this way. What they're doing is signaling what group they're part of. That's what they're doing, right? Okay, so look, the reason I'm mentioning all that is because to be able to get past that, right, to be able to quit that fragmentation, we have to expand our we. We have to have things that, because humans or beings are quite sophisticated. We can be parts of all kind of concentric groups, right? I'm a member
Right.
of my I'm a member of my family. I'm a member of this baseball team. I'm a member of this platoon, this battalion, this division, you know, I'm a Texan, I'm a etc. We can do all these groups,
Right.
right? Okay, so but we can also have different levels of loyalty to other groups that are within our larger group, right? Like I'm from Texas, right? And I think it's naturally it's the best place to be from in the United States.
Right.
But
Yes.
but I can put up with these Marylanders, right? Because we have things that make us we with between the two of us, right? We
Yes.
have things in common, right? So when you see like the recruiting woes and blah 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 in the army and all that, look, this is what's going on. We're losing track of the we. What makes us us? Why are we Americans? Why are we in whatever group you want to pick? Okay, so you know, Americans are a really good example because it's pretty obvious. What are the things that bind us together? Things that bind us together are two: equality before the law and uh, mutually supported freedom. Like that's what binds us
Yes.
together, right? So think about the words of the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident. We are all created equal, endowed by our Creator
Right.
with certain unalienable rights. That's what it means. Equality before the law, and we have individual rights that we are willing to support of each other. So who's the bad guy? The bad guy is the one trying to force other people to live the way they want. You know, I've lived it all over the country and all over the world. Remember I was saying earlier about you have to
Yes.
conform to right. So I lived in Georgia where this group is in charge. I now live in New York where this group is in charge. Okay.
Yes.
And it's the exact same thing, exactly the same enforcement mechanisms, exactly the same, all that. That's the things that bind us together, right? Like I'm a soldier, right?
Yes.
Why am I serving in the armed forces of the United States of America? Well, I believe, right? I believe in equality before the law. You know, I believe that everybody of every group in this country, of every subgroup, is a citizen, stands before the court the same, right? We need to be that way. That's got to be a value that we have to share. I
Right.
believe, I believe in mutually supported freedom. That means you get to do what you want. I get to do what I want. I don't get to tell you you can't do what you want. You don't get to tell me I can't do what I want, so long as my stuff is not infringing upon yours. Now, there's
Right.
lots of areas of rub on that, but boy, but we can work through all those areas if we keep those principles in mind, you know,
Absolutely.
like it's the whole
Yes.
don't tread on me thing, right?
Right.
And like I've spent my whole life willing to go to war and die so that other people can be free.
Right.
And that means I have to like let them be free. Freedom
Yes.
means freedom means that
Yes.
people are not going to do what you necessarily want. They could do whatever the hell they want with their freedom as long as it's not hurting you or your children,
Right.
And if they just decide to
Yes.
hurt you or your children with them, then they've stepped over the bounds. We're no longer together, right?
Right.
See what I mean? So that's where we have to
Yes.
like educate everybody on those principles. Yeah. So
Absolutely.
yeah. So you know what I mean? We've covered a lot of ground, but like I said,
We
that's
have.
yeah.
Yes, but I've never had anyone on to discuss the psychological side of combat. There's always been someone to talk about martial arts, weaponry, and even actually I haven't had anyone on for first aid and safety. That's probably upcoming.
I'll have a
I
couple
just had
have a couple of
oh
suggestions for you.
please.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I would love that. And I just had Chet Palumbo on to talk about criminal
The law.
justice law. So yes, and that episode will have released by the time this one does, but this is a first. So I'm very grateful for this perspective.
And
We
listen,
are coming. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, listen, as we get feedback, because we've covered a lot of ground, if people would like to hear more
Yes,
about specific areas of what we've talked about, it'd be great to like come back and do,
please.
each one of these areas we've only kind of like covered the surface of,
Right.
and for the record, I also am quite an experienced martial artist, so so we
Absolutely.
can do that
Yes.
stuff too. I just find there's a
Absolutely.
lot of people who know that stuff. So
Yes. And I appreciate you picking this unique perspective. I would love for you to come on and talk about that as well. Um, don't get me wrong. So I'm really glad we have this variety now, and we do get a lot of feedback from listeners. So I will take notes and have you back on. Um, Thank you so much for this episode. I'm grateful. I feel like I need to go back and listen to really take it all in. Of course, I'm here. I'm being mindful, like you mentioned. But there are some things where I was like, man, I'm going to have to hear that a second time. And I can't hit, the 15-second replay right now. So, um, but as far as, because we are coming to time, as far as a lesson or just um, a tip, if you may, that you'd like to send the listeners off with. Do you have one? I asked that totally
yeah, I guess
backwards, but
no, it's all right. Listen, my 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 primary lesson for each of us, right? First off, is you be the warrior in the room. Be focused on your mission, and your mission is to make the lives of everyone around you safer. Okay, you do that by being a well-trained person. Okay, and when you do that, then you can focus on expand that focus, not just to making those people safer, but you can make their lives better. Because if we focus on those sort of things, we expand our we, right? And we stay mentally healthy, and we work through all these moral issues that we're talking about so that we come through no matter what happens in the world. And terrible, terrible, terrible things happen, right? They happen to us all, and you can't control it. Okay. And you can't necessarily even control what you're going to do in those things, because you don't have any idea what the situation is. Remember, I was saying about the soldiers earlier. And so that's what causes those problems is not understanding that dynamic, right? Be the best person you can be, make the world a better place. You have the tools right in front of you to do that. Starts with training. Train yourself, right? Deeds.
absolutely.
Go do the deeds. Put yourself to the test. Be strong.
Absolutely. What an incredibly strong message to leave this enlightening episode with. Thank you so much, Matt. This was an incredible opportunity for the podcast. And thank you for your time. For those that do not know, we had an hour of technical issues before this episode. So he has been so patient and has had to listen to the whole thing while my husband and I have troubleshooted. So again, thank you so very much. And I'm glad you've enjoyed it as well.
Thank you very much. And it's been really nice to meet you. And I've enjoyed our talk a lot.
Thank you. And I'm excited to meet you in September in Florida for the Combative Summit.
I
So
know it's going to be
I'm
nice and warm.
Oh, yes. Woohoo. Yes. I am so pale. It's blinding. So this is going to be an interesting experience for me. But if anyone is interested in that, hopefully by the time this episode airs, there are tickets left. I will link the website to the Combative Summit in the show notes so that you can also attend and meet Matt in person and me in person if you'd like to. So yes. So thank you so much, Matt. And if you are listening and you're interested in exclusive content, you can become a Patreon member. You can visit She Shield on Instagram and TikTok at She Shield Pod. A special thank you to Sagetta Gear, one of the official sponsors of She Shield, for Sagetta Gear and concealed carry duty gear. And I'm sorry, for concealed carry gear and duty gear by Sagetta, you can use code SheShield10 for 10% off your order and to support the podcast. All resources mentioned, including all of Matt's links, so you can have access to him, follow him on social media, will be linked in the show notes. If you like the podcast, you could really help by liking, subscribing, and leaving a review. For me on Spotify, that's my favorite platform. Not sponsored, of course. All you have to do is scroll up and you can hit 5 stars if you'd like to. Leave an honest review, of course. And then if you or anyone you know is a firearms owner experiencing a crisis, look into holdmyguns.org. They are an organization that will connect you with a local gun shop or FFL to store your firearm for you. The link to access their website and to find a storage location partner is available in the show notes. In the meantime, stay safe and stay vigilant. Are you ready to step up your shooting game? Introducing Walkers Incorporated, the pioneers in ear protection for shooting, hunting, and commercial applications. For over 25 years, Walkers has been revolutionizing the industry, ensuring your hearing safety and enhancing your shooting experience. Anytime I'm on the range, indoor or outdoor, I use Walkers ear protection to have crystal clear communication with my fellow shooters. I currently use the Silencer 2.0s and the Razor Slims for my range adventures. Not only does Walkers protect your hearing, but they also protect you. Being able to communicate with others on the range is vital to personal safety. You shouldn't have to sacrifice your safety when the ultimate goal is for overall better self-protection. With Walkers, you'll experience unparalleled comfort, unmatched innovation, and the industry standard in shooting ear protection. Never settle for anything less when it comes to your safety and enjoyment on the range. You can save on Walker's ear protection and support the podcast by using code SHESHIELD. That's SHESHIELD at checkout.